friends. This is the Judges. The King is coming. This episode, Jericho is fallen, is fallen. In our previous episode, we found ourselves at Jericho. The spies had gone in. They had sworn to protect Rahab and her entire household because she was a prostitute there in the city of Jericho, and she hid the spies and worked it out to where they could get out safely by letting them down with a scarlet cord, a scarlet rope outside of the wall. And the spies told her if she will put that same scarlet cord in the window so that it can be seen by the invading army when they take Jericho, that everyone who is in the house will be saved from destruction. And so their salvation came by way of this scarlet rope, this scarlet cord. And the Savior, which is Joshua, honored that which was spoken by those spies who came into the land and spied out the land. And now what we're going to do is pick it up here, because this is at the end of a 7-day march. For 6 days, all of Israel, following the Ark of the Covenant, blowing the trumpets once every day for 6 days, and then on the 7th day, they marched around the city 7 times. And in verse 16, it tells us that the priest blew the trumpets, and Yehoshua said, "Shout, for YaHoVaH has given you the city. And the city," he said, "shall be accursed. Even it and all that are in it belongs to YaHoVaH. Only Rahab the harlot and her house, they are the only ones that are going to be left alive." And then he said again, to keep yourself from the accursed thing. Keep, shomer, guard yourself. You are responsible for doing this, because no one can watch over you. You have to watch over yourself, because if you violate this thing, the Almighty is still among us, and he is going to seek out any sin, and it is going to be exposed, and that person will be judged. The nation will be judged, as we see from this very thing. So the accursed thing, that which is banned or appointed for destruction, he says, you keep yourself from that, lest you make yourself accursed, unless you make yourself appointed for destruction. And we also see this in the book of the Revelation, where in Revelation chapter 20, as it talks about the great white throne judgment, it says that he saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were open. And another book was open, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books. And everyone was judged according to the works. The sea gave up the dead that was in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead that were in them. And they were judged every man according to his works. And death and hell was cast in the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whosoever was not written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. And so we see that the Almighty, when judgment comes, it is judgment which is based on a standard. The standard is the word of the living God. He has told us how life is to be lived and how we are to treat our fellow man, how we are to treat the planet, how we are to conduct ourselves while we are alive upon this earth. Because life, for the most part, is a test. It's a test of our character. And our character is what we do when no one is around to see us. Our character is what comes out when we are tested, when we're given a lot of money, or when we're given power. Those are two of the big tests in life. What does a person do when they have access to money, or when power, authority is given to them? And then we see what a person is really made out of, because a person who is given money or given power, who is an abusive person, will then abuse other people. They will take advantage of other people on a grander scale. But if we conduct ourselves according to the word, then we see that one day that judgment of the Almighty is going to be righteous according to his word, and a person is going to either be thrown into a lake of fire or be admitted into the eternal kingdom based upon their works. Now, of course, the Christian world doesn't want to talk about works. They want to think everything is by grace. Salvation is by grace, but reward is of merit. You don't get rewarded for doing nothing. You only get rewarded for doing that which is worthy of reward, for doing the right thing when bad things happen, for doing the right thing when other options are available to you, when you've got the money and when you've got the power to be able to go in a different direction, but you do that which is right. That is what character is. We continue on. Keep yourself from the cursed thing, lest you be cursed yourself. And when you take of the accursed thing and make the camp of Israel a curse and trouble it, that is when judgment is going to fall. In verse 19, but all the silver, the gold, the vessels of brass and iron, they're all consecrated to YaHoVaH. And they are going to come into his treasury. This stuff, the idols and all that's be melted down. It's going to be used for different things. So the people shouted, and it goes on and say, now the people shouted when the priest blew the trumpets, and it came to pass when the people heard the sound of the trumpet. The people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. So the people went up in the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, man and woman, young and old, ox and sheep, and ass with the edge of the sword. But Joshua had said unto the two men that had spied out the country, that you go into the harlot's house, and you bring out the woman and all that she has, just as you swore to her. And so they went in, and they brought her out, her father, mother, brother, and everything that they had, and brought all of her kindred, and left them outside of the camp of Israel. Then they burned the entire city with fire, all that was in it, except they took out the silver and the brass and the gold and the iron, and they put it into the treasury for the house of YaHoVaH. In verse 25, it says, Joshua saved Rahab alive, her father's house, and all that she had, and just as he had said to the messengers, the spies. And then Joshua, very important, Joshua adjured them at that time, saying, and this is a prophecy, cursed be the man before YaHoVaH that rises up and builds this city Jericho. He shall lay the foundation thereof in his firstborn, and in his youngest son he shall set up the gates of it. And we go all the way to 1 Kings chapter 16 to find out where this prophecy actually transpired. 1 Kings chapter 16 and in verse 30. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were with him. And it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, he also took Jezebel, the daughter of Baal, the king of the Zidonians, and he went and served Baal. And so, during the reign of Ahab, this is like the most wicked time in all of Israel. And it says that he reared up an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. And Ahab made himself a grove. And Ahab did more to provoke YaHoVaH to anger than all the kings of Israel that were before him, because he did learn the way of the heathen. He learned how the heathen worship and serve their gods and did the same thing and said he was doing it for the true God. But he's doing it for Baal, which simply means the Lord in Hebrew. It's indistinct commandments, an indistinct God. He's just the Lord. And in his day, verse 34, did Hiel, the Bethelite, build Jericho. And just as it was spoken according to the word of the Lord, which was spoken by Jeremiah, he laid the firstborn thereof, and Abiram, his firstborn, and set the gates thereof in his youngest son, Zagub. Now, what is this talking about? It is when the dedication, when he began to rebuild, he set the foundations, he sacrificed his first, his one of his sons, he sacrificed, Abiram, he sacrificed him, and then built the wall upon his son. And then, when it came time to erect the gates, which is the part of the city that is used, the final defense and where people come and go, he then sacrificed his firstborn son and set it up. The wall was Abiram, his firstborn, and then Segub, his youngest son, he set the gates up upon his corpse. And so we see that in the time of Ahab, that child sacrifice was being done in the land of Israel. And the Bethelite, Bethel, from Bethel, and this is Bethel, the house of God. This is how perverted and sick and twisted it got in northern Israel, that they got not only into the remembrances of the pagan sun worship, such as the child mass, December 25th, when Nimrod was reincarnated as little baby Tammuz, and they did a child sacrifice at that time. Well, nowadays in America, we don't do the actual child sacrifice. We just do all of the things around the child sacrifice and call it Christ Mass instead of child mass. But it's basically the same thing. Now, we go back to Joshua. Chapter 7, verse 1. But the children of Israel committed a trespass in the accursed thing for Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah. He took of the accursed thing, and the anger of YaHoVaH was kindled against the children of Israel. And Yehoshua sent men from Jericho to Ai. They sent them to Ai. And it says that the men of Ai smote about 36 of the men of Israel and chased them from before the gate all the way to Shebarim, and smote them, and the people's heart melted. This is so unusual. They go into Jericho and they just completely dominate. They take a walled city, but they go up against this little village and they get whacked. Something is wrong. In verse 11, it tells us what went wrong, because the Almighty was not among them. In verse 11, it says, Israel has sinned. Israel has sinned, and they've transgressed the covenant that I commanded them. They've taken of the accursed thing. They have become accursed. They've stolen. They've also dissembled. They've conspired together to do this, and they put it even among their own stuff. That is why the children of Israel could not stand before their enemies, but they turned their backs and they ran, because they are accursed. They are slated for destruction. So, they all went before Yehoshua. And finally, they narrowed it down to exactly who was responsible. And verse 20, it says that Achan answered Yehoshua and said, Indeed, I have sinned against YaHoVaH, the God of Israel. And this is what I've done. When I saw among the spoils a goodly Babylonish garment, and 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold about 50 shekels weight, I coveted them and took them, and behold, they are hid in the earth in the midst of my tent, and the silver underneath it. This filthy, stinking garment of Babylonian pagan sun worship. By the way, this is not a Santa Claus hat. This is a Phrygian cap. This is what is worn by Mithra, the Roman sun god who was born on December 25th, if you'll check your Encyclopedia Britannica, that child sacrifice was done to Mithra, just as it was done to Tammuz. The Phrygian cap, the priest of Sybil wore this very thing. And so what this goodly Babylonian garment is, we don't know. If it was red fur with white cuffs and a big white belt and jingle bells on it, we have no idea, ladies and gentlemen, what it was. But it was set aside for the worship of pagan gods. And the Almighty said, you take this and you die. And so, verse 25, Yehoshua said, why have you troubled us? YaHoVaH will trouble you this day, and all Israel, stone them with stones, burn them alive with fire after they had stoned them with stones. And it says they took the entire family. Everyone in Achan's family died on that day. And then chapter 8, verse 1, YaHoVaH said unto Joshua, fear not, don't be dismayed, and take all these people up and go to war and go to Ai, because I've given into your hand the king of Ai, and his people and the city and his land. And this is exactly what they did. And so now they used deceptive tactics and lured the people out. And once they got them out and got Israel on the run as before, we're going to see this is a favorite tactic that Israel is going to use in the book of Judges as well, is that the confidence is the people in the people that had whipped them just before this. Now they think they've got the mastery of them, and so Israel turns tail and runs, and then the liars in wait come out and then go and take the city and close in on them, and bam, they take them. Deceptive tactics in war, completely permissible and acceptable. Whatever you have to do to kill the enemy. Some people need to die. And in this case, these people were slated for extermination because of what was going on with them. I don't think there's anybody in the world, well, I suppose David Rockefeller probably would shed a tear because of the death of Hitler, but it really wouldn't matter how Hitler died, because the man, because of what he did, he needed to die. Whatever tactics had to be used, from inside, from outside, that is what we see that's being used in combat in the scriptures right here. And then it says in verse 29, the king of Ai, he hanged on a tree. And again, the word tree is the word stake. It's an impaling stake. It's also translated as gallows. Here, after he was killed, he hung him on not a tree. The Hebrew word is wood, and what was done as an example to everyone, as a point of dishonor and disgrace and a curse to him, then his body was impaled in front of everyone. And as soon as the sun was down, Joshua commanded that they should take down his carcass from the impaling stake and cast it at the entering of the gate of the city, and raise thereon a heap of stone that remains even unto this day. And then it says that Joshua built an altar unto YaHoVaH, the God of Israel, in Mount Ebal. Now this takes us right back to what Moses told Joshua to do. He got to Mount Ebal. This is at Shechem. This is Mount Gerizim or YaHoVaH, the Mount of Blessing in Mount Ebal. And so he built an altar to YaHoVaH there, just as Moses had commanded him. And it was written in the book of the law of Moses. This is exactly what it says in Deuteronomy. An altar of whole stones over which no man has ever lifted up any iron, and they offered there burnt offerings unto YaHoVaH, and they sacrificed peace offerings. And he wrote there upon the stones a copy of the Torah of Moses. Now this isn't Genesis all the way through Deuteronomy. This is the law that Moses laid out. This is Deuteronomy laying out there a copy on the stones, and he wrote it in the presence of all the children of Israel. And all of Israel, their elders, their officers, their judges, they stood on this side of the ark and on that side before the priests, the Levites, which bear the ark of the covenant of YaHoVaH, as well as the strangers, and he that was born among them. Half of them were over against Mount Gerizim, upon which the Samaritan, the remains of the Samaritan temple is there. And the other half of them over on the other side, Mount Ebal, and just as Moses had commanded them, and that they should bless the people of Israel. Remember, there were 12 verses of blessings for Israel, and there were 52 verses of curses against Israel. And after he did that, he read all the words of the Torah, the blessings and the cursings, to all that was written in the book of the law, and there was not a single word of all that Moses commanded, which Yehoshua did not read before all the congregation of Israel, with the women, the little one, and the strangers that were conversant among them. Now, of course, there were some that were later added in. Rahab, for instance, she may have, and her family may not have been conversant among them, conversant in the language. But all who could understand the language, the strangers, everyone is under the same Torah. It's the same for the native-born Israelite, and it is the same for those who are grafted into Israel. It's the same Torah. There is not one for the Jews and then one for the Gentiles. There's, it's a famous thing. The Torah, that's just for the Jews. Wait, is this just the Judeans as in Jews? Is this just the Jews as in Judaism, the Jews? You have to define your terms, because when you define these things biblically, then all of Israel, whether you lived in the area of Judea or the northern tribes, all of the tribes of Israel, including the strangers that are among you, it is one Torah for all. It's not, you get to pick and choose as a Gentile of what you want to do. There's no such thing as Noahide laws. This is something completely made up by the Pharisees so that the Jews do this and the rest of the world does that. This is not what the scripture tells us. These are man-made rules and regulations, stripping the authority of the Torah and Moses, redefining it, as modern-day Judaism does, to where you have two houses, us and them. There are so many two-house Jews and Messianic Jews out there. It's us, we keep the commandments, and them, those who, go ahead and keep doing your Christmas and Easter. Just keep on giving us money and apologizing to us for the Holocaust. And you can be associate members of the body of Messiah, but you can't be a full member of the body of Messiah. You can't really keep the Torah. Why do they come up with these things, ladies and gentlemen? It's because a Gentile who has the Torah written on their heart keeps the Torah with more passion than those who've been raised in Judaism, who become Messianic Jews. That's the problem. Those raised in Judaism who take whatever commandments they want, they become Reform or they become conservative, they're all over the map, and then they become Messianic Jews. Well, they find out that becoming a Messianic Jew and just saying that Jesus is the Messiah doesn't cut it. If he's not living in you, if the Spirit of the Holy One is not within you, you just changed your religion, but the Torah is not really written on your heart, what you will find as a Jew who becomes a Messianic Jew who believes in Yeshua but does not have the Spirit and does not have the Torah written on your heart, you will find that there are people that are not even of the bloodline of Israel in any way, shape, or form. They are former headhunter pygmies from the tribe of Zulu that have not one somated of Israelite blood in them, that when they receive the Messiah and he is dwelling within them, they find that they have a greater passion for keeping the Torah, and it's really written on their hearts, than someone who just says he's the Messiah. See, there are fakers out there across the board. Those who come from Judaism, who become Messianic Jews, and then before long, they become Buddhists, they become Orthodox again, because they don't have the Spirit within them. I'm not saying all don't. I'm just saying those who do not have not been begotten again by the Spirit of the living God. They don't have the Torah written in their hearts. They don't want to keep it. They are still at enmity against him, but they've got a religion, and they want the religion. They want a semblance of the Messiah. They want a Jewish Messiah, but they want to do all the things of Judaism so that they feel part of Phariseeism and part of their old culture. But it's those who have come to the Messiah who present the tables of their heart, and upon their heart is written by the finger of the Almighty the commandments. When they keep the Torah, they keep it because they have grace to keep it. They have the divine empowerment to keep it, because it's not them that keeps it in their flesh. It's the Messiah living in them that keeps it. Whenever someone who says they have the Spirit of the living God, they have the Messiah in them, and they don't keep the Torah, they are in rebellion against the one true God, and rebellion against the Spirit of the living God. Because one who has the Torah written on their heart will keep it, because the Messiah in them will be keeping it, and they will not be in rebellion against him. The grace that nurtures us, empowers us to do all things through Messiah who strengthens us. I'd like to take a break right now for those of you whose lives have been changed, that have the Messiah living in them. Those of you out there whose lives have been changed by this message and by this ministry. We have put it out there for years now, free of charge. At great expense, we have freely given, and you have freely received. Now, it is your turn to freely give. So we're asking you, stand with us. If you do not stand with us, then there comes a time that the light switch goes off on that particular venue, and you don't get to see it anymore. We are operating under great stress at many times, but yet knowing that the Almighty is the one that put us on this path. It's stress because we don't want to fail you. We don't want to go out there. Stand with us. Be a part of this ministry. We'll be back in just a moment. After the blessings and the cursings were laid out before the children of Israel, including the mixed multitude, the strangers, the hewers of wood, the drawers of water, all those who had joined themselves to Israel, and just as Moses had in the covenant of Moab, just before going across, sending the children of Israel across with Yehoshua, now Yehoshua does exactly what Moses says to do, and now it is time to take the land. And all of the kings that were on this side of Jordan, we read in Joshua chapter 9, verse 1, in the hills, the valleys, the coast over against the great sea, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Hivites, all these people, they gathered together to fight against Joshua and Israel, and they all came together with one accord. And it says that when the inhabitants of Gibeon means a hill city, it's about 5 miles away from Jerusalem, literally a city set on a hill that cannot be hid. When the inhabitants of Gibeon heard about this, then they worked a wily thing. What they did is they pretended that they were ambassadors. They took some old sacks and saddled their asses, got some old wineskins and old shoes and some old stale bread that had been out for a long time, and they pretended like they were coming from this far country. The bread was all moldy, and then they came to Israel and said, we want to make a league with you. We want to make an agreement with you. We come for a long distance, and so they tricked the children of Israel and said, we came from a long way, and in verse 9 and following, we came from a very far country, your servants have come, because we've heard the name of YaHoVaH, your Elohim, and the fame of him, and everything that he did, and the 2 kings, to Sihon and to Og in Bashan, which was at Ashtaroth, or the city of Easter. And so we went to come to you and say that we want to join in with you. We don't want to fight against you. And it went on to talk about the cities that they were from. And so they made an agreement with them and said, okay, you can join in with us. You can join in with us, and this is exactly what Israel was told, that these nations, other nations, if they willingly submit to you, they don't attack you, leave them alone. So they pretended that they were of these nations. And so it turns out that Joshua finds out who they really are. And in verse 22, it says, Joshua called him and said, why have you beguiled us? You're not a long way from us. You dwell right here in the land. Now, therefore, you are cursed. None of you will ever be freed from being a bondman and hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. Well, that's a lot better than dying. They're going to be in servitude for all of their generations. They're not going to be allowed to come into the congregation. And so verse 27, Joshua made them that day the hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of YaHoVaH. Now, chapter 10, verse 1, it came to pass when Adonai-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard how Joshua had taken Ai and had utterly destroyed it, then he got together the other kings in the area. Now, Adonai-Zedek means my Lord is righteous, but don't think that my Lord is righteous means that he's a worshiper of the true God. It's like George Harrison singing My Sweet Lord. So My Sweet Lord, oh, that sounds like a real good Christian song. Let's all sing it along until he gets into this Hare Krishna mantra with this nonsense about this fictitious Indian god. And then you find out that, My Sweet Lord can mean anything. It can mean Krishna, Buddha, Kali, the goddess of death, and all that stuff. My Lord is righteous doesn't mean anything. Anyone, the devils believe in God and they tremble, but they don't obey him. They don't do what he says. And so he kind of had this whole thing in the whole Christian world as well. Nobody does what Yeshua says to do, but they call him Lord. You know, my sweet Lord. They'll sing sweet baby Jesus songs all, at Christmas time and all the year, but they don't do what he says to do. But it says that this king, Adonai-Zedek, got together all these other kings, and they went and attacked Gibeon. Because Gibeon made an alliance with Israel, and so we're going to go kill him. And so Gibeon says to Israel, wait, we made this league with you, we're friends with you, and please help us. And so Joshua said, okay, and it's more than Joshua. In verse 8 it says, and YaHoVaH said unto Yehoshua, fear them not, for I have delivered all these kings into your hand, there shall not one of them stand before us. So when they said, save us, when Gibeon said, save us, then the Almighty said, go ahead, save them. And it came to pass, verse 11, as they fled from before Israel to the going down to Beth Horon, that YaHoVaH cast down great stones from heaven upon them, and they died. And there are more people that died from the hailstones than whom the children of Israel slew with the sword. And they then spoke Yehoshua to YaHoVaH in that day, that he delivered the Amorites before the children of Israel, and he said to them in the sight of Israel, sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ayalon. And the sun stood still, the moon stayed until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and hastened not to go down about a whole day. And it says that there was not another day like it, before or after it, that YaHoVaH hearkened unto the voice of a man. For YaHoVaH fought for Israel, and Israel was fighting for Gentiles. That's who they were fighting for. Gentiles who joined themselves, and even though they're in the position of slavery, the Almighty listened, and, from their perspective, the sun stood still. From the earth's perspective, the rotation of the earth stopped. How can the Almighty stop the rotation of the earth and everything remain the same? Well, I don't know that Sir Isaac Newton figured that one out, but the scriptures tell us this is exactly what transpired. It's never happened since, it's never happened before, but to avenge themselves on their enemy, they needed the daylight to be able to do it, and when Joshua cried out, that is when the sun stood still. Well, we have several various battles that take place over the next several chapters. We see in the next chapter, in chapter 10, verse 33, we see about Horam, the king of Gezer, in Joshua 11:1, Jabin, the king of Hazor. Both of these places were later rebuilt by Solomon, and the gates of Gezer and Hazor, when he rebuilt them, they measure out, even to this day, in the exact divine cubit of 20.62 inches, the very divine cubit that is used to measure the Ark of the Covenant and all of the buildings of the temple. The divine royal Egyptian cubit, it's sometimes called, but it's literally the divine cubit. And there are 5 kings that were hiding in a cave. And so Joshua said, roll a stone over it, stand guard, we'll be back later. Came back, brought them out, and he told his men, put your feet on their neck, and they cut their heads off, and they then were able to overcome them. And then it says in 12:1, these are the kings of the land which the children of Israel smote and possessed their land. And it goes right down one after another until we get down to chapter 13, verse 1. Yehoshua was old and stricken in years, and YaHoVaH said unto him, thou art old and stricken in years. And Joshua said, I know. I already read the first part of verse 1. And there remains very much land to be possessed. You're an old man, there's a whole lot of land that has to be possessed. And he goes on and enumerates this land that has to be possessed. So we go now to chapter 14. These are the countries which the children of Israel inherited in the land of Canaan. And this was given to them by lot, as it says in verse 2. It says that by lot was their inheritance, as YaHoVaH commanded by the hand of Moses, for the 9 tribes and a half. Because Moses had given an inheritance of 2 tribes and a half on the other side of Jordan, but now we have 9.5 tribes that is going to receive their inheritance on this side of Jordan. And remember, they're not going to be able to take all the land all the way to the Euphrates River yet, because they have to multiply so that they can inhabit all the land. It still hasn't happened to this day, ladies and gentlemen. But remember, Israel, China, and India are the same age, basically, as nations. However, neither China nor India have been taken out of their land, conquered and taken out of their land and spread into other countries. Both India and China is over 1 billion people. Neither India nor China were promised that they would number like the sands of the sea or as the stars in heaven. But Israel was. But guess what? Israel was taken out of their land. Judah, those living in Judea, were taken out of their land, and most of them never came back from Babylon, and now their descendants are coming back out of Babylon. But the Israelites have been scattered, and the Orthodox, every morning before the sun rises, they are davening, they are praying down at the wall in Jerusalem, praying for the return of the lost sheep of the house of Israel, which according to the Orthodox, they believe that many of them are among the Christian world to this day. Very difficult to prove one way or the other. And so, exactly where they went, because they're lost. They have been lost. They were pagans when they were taken out of the land, and it says in the prophets that they will, in their exile, they will wake up in their paganism, and they will loathe themselves for the abominations that they inherited, and they will cry out in repentance for the abominations they inherited, and they will come back to the worship of the true God, come back to the land of Israel in the last days. And when they come back, I suspect that they would be 1 billion strong. We will need all the land over to the river Euphrates at that time. Now in Joshua chapter 15, verse 1, this is the lot of the tribe of Judah. And so chapter 15 is all about the area given to Judah. And chapter 16, this is the lot of the children of Joseph, which fell from the Jordan by Jericho all the way, and it gives the detail, all the way through Bethel. And then the half-tribe of Manasseh is detailed in chapter 17. We're not going to read all this, obviously. Then chapter 18, verse 1, the whole congregation of the children of Israel assembled at Shiloh and set up the tabernacle of the congregation, and the land was subdued there before them. Yet there remained 7 tribes of Israel, which had not received their inheritance, as we read in verse chapter 2. And then verse 4, it says, go out from among you 3 men from each tribe, I will send them, and they will rise, go through the land, and describe it according to the inheritance, and they shall come back again to me, and they shall divide it into 7 parts. And verse 8, it says, go and walk through the land and describe it. This is a survey, ladies and gentlemen, and it is thoroughly described, and it is detailed in a book, as it says in verse 9. And so this is how the land of Israel is divided. Verse 11, the lot of the tribe of the children of Benjamin came up, and this is the first of the 7. And then it is described. And then Joshua 19:1, the second lot, this is for Simeon. And then verse 10, the third lot for Zebulun. Verse 17, the fourth lot, Issachar. The fifth lot in verse 24 for Asher. Naphtali comes up in verse 32 as the 6th lot. And finally, the 7th and final lot comes up for the children of Dan, which we are going to see the final chapters, 2 chapters in the book of the judges is dealing with what happens with Dan in this seventh lot right here. That's why it's important that we go through this. It furthermore details all of the refuge cities, and then in chapter 21, it details the Levite cities, because the Levites get a portion out of each one of the tribal areas, because they're going to dwell among their brethren to be the ministers among their brethren. They are going to be the ones who are supposed to be judging the people in their compliance with the commandments of the Almighty. They are supposed to judge Israel. That is their job. And so we are then we go all the way to the chapter 22, verse 1. Then Joshua called the Reubenites, which the offspring of Reuben is Hanok, and the Hanokites, and the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh. And this is where a very important thing that we started our episode with. Verse 5. YaHoVaH, he said, gave you on the other side of Jordan all this land. But take diligent heed to do the commandment of the law, which Moses, the servant of YaHoVaH, charged you, to love YaHoVaH, to walk in all of his ways, to keep his commandments and cleave unto him. Him you shall serve with all your heart and with all your soul. So Yehoshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went into their tents. And so they went all the way on the other side of the Jordan, because now they get to go home. After the land is subdued to a certain degree, now they are discharged. And this is after we had erected the altar at Shiloh. And it will remain there for the next 400 years. The tabernacle, the altar, it's all at Shiloh. And this is where we will celebrate the Passover for the next 400 years. This is the place where YaHoVaH chooses out of all the nations to put his name there. We are not to sacrifice the Passover in the gates of our own city. It's only there. Later, that place is going to be moved by divine revelation to Jerusalem. And David is the one who's going to set in order all or much of the provision for the building of the temple, which will be accomplished by Solomon. But at this point, this is where all sacrifices are to be done. It's not to be done anyplace else in the land. Now, this is very important, because now it says in verse 10, when they came, this is the Reubenites, the Gadites, the half tribe of Manasseh, when they came to the border of the Jordan, that are in the land of Canaan, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh built there an altar by Jordan, a great altar to see. Everyone could see this. In verse 12, and when the children of Israel heard this, the whole congregation of Israel gathered together at Shiloh to go to war against them. Why? Because from their perspective, they were disobedient. They were building another altar when the Almighty had chosen by revelation, and Joshua had established this place as the place where YaHoVaH puts his name. No one challenged Joshua. Joshua heard directly from the Most High, this is the place and the only place, and these men put an altar, and so Israel said, okay, they've already gone away. And so they assembled to go to war. Verse 16, thus saith the whole congregation of YaHoVaH to these 2.5 tribes, what trespass is this that you have committed against the God of Israel, to turn away this day from following YaHoVaH, in that you have builded an altar that you might rebel this day against YaHoVaH? Do not learn the way of the heathen. Do not learn how they worship and serve their gods. Do not do the same thing and say you're doing it for him. Is not the iniquity of Peor? Isn't this sufficient? We're not even cleansed from this to this very day that we built an altar. And now you are going to plague the entire congregation. And so they are there to turn them away from this. And so now, verse 19, if the land of your possession is unclean, then pass over into the land of the possession of YaHoVaH, where his tabernacle is, and take possession among us. But do not rebel against YaHoVaH, against us, in building you an altar beside the altar of YaHoVaH our Elohim. There's only one, and this is not it. And so, verse 21, we have to get it straight. The children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh answered and said, unto the heads of the thousands of Israel, we're going to read here in verse 22. Here it is. YaHoVaH, the God of all gods. YaHoVaH, God of gods. He knows, and Israel shall also know it. If this is in rebellion, or if it is in transgression against YaHoVaH, do not save us. Kill us all. But we have built us an altar, and it's not to turn away from following YaHoVaH. And if it is, and if we are going to offer a burnt offerings or meat offerings or peace offerings, let YaHoVaH himself judge this matter. And if we have not rather done it for fear of this thing, in respect to this saying, that in the time to come, your children might speak unto our children, saying, what have you to do with YaHoVaH, the Elohim of Israel? Because YaHoVaH hath made Jordan a border between us and you. You children of Reuben, you children of Gad, you have no part of YaHoVaH. So shall your children make our children cease from fearing YaHoVaH. That is why we said, let us prepare to build us an altar. This altar is not for a burnt offering or for sacrifice. This altar is so that it may be a witness between us and you and our generations after us, that we might do the service of YaHoVaH before him with our burnt offerings and with our sacrifices and with our peace offerings, that your children will not say to our children in the time to come that you have no part in YaHoVaH. They wanted to make sure that there was no misunderstanding. Just because we're over on this side of the Jordan and you're here, we are not separated from you. You are not going to tell us or our great-grandchildren that. This is a testimony between the two of us. Therefore, we said, this is what we're going to do for our generations in time to come. And this is the pattern of the altar of YaHoVaH, which our fathers made. It's not for burnt offerings, it's not for sacrifice, it's a witness between you and us. God forbid that we should rebel against YaHoVaH and turn this day from following YaHoVaH to build an altar for burnt offerings, for meat offerings, or for sacrifices beside the altar of YaHoVaH, our Elohim, that is before his tabernacle in Shiloh. And Pinhas, the son of Eleazar, the priest, the princes of the congregation, the heads of thousands of Israel that were with them, heard the words of the children of Reuben, the words of Gad, and the children of Manasseh. The words that they spoke, it pleased them. And they said to the children of Reuben and Gad and Manasseh, this day we perceive that YaHoVaH is among us, because you have not committed a trespass against YaHoVaH. Now you have delivered the children of Israel out of the hand of YaHoVaH. And Pinhas, the son of Eleazar, the priest, and the princes, they returned from the children of Reuben and Gad out of the land of Gilead and into the land of Canaan. They left and they went back, and they brought them word again. And the thing pleased all the children of Israel. And the children of Israel blessed the Most High and did not intend to go up against them in battle and destroy them as they first intended. And the children of Reuben and the children of Gad called the altar Ed. Well, the word Ed is it's actually Hebrew. They just transliterated it. The word Ed means witness. For it shall be a witness between us that YaHoVaH is Elohim. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to point this out, that when we do Passover, and which we have just done a few weeks ago, we have to stipulate this, that we do not keep the Passover. The Passovers only be kept in the place where YaHoVaH puts his name. That is Jerusalem. That is where the temple was. The Levitical priesthood is in disarray. The temple is destroyed. Nobody keeps Passover today. We celebrate, we remember Passover. But there are those who sacrifice lambs. They pretend and they do it as if they are keeping Passover. And we are seeing this happen and crop up all over America. And we see then these same people go into gross sexual immorality, into drug use, into deep drug use, into all sorts of perversion, because the Almighty said, you don't do this. You do not keep the Passover, but what we do is remember and celebrate the Passover. That is how we keep ourselves clean before the Most High, because Yeshua, our Passover, was sacrificed for us, and we remember that all the days of our life. I'd like to close in prayer. Yivarechecha YaHoVaH v'yishmerecha. Ya'ir YaHoVaH panav elecha v'yichanecha. Yisa YaHoVaH panav elecha v'yisem lecha shalom. B'shem Yeshua HaMashiach. Sar Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, Torah fans. Good Sabbath and Shabbat Tov. Have a good week.